All right, we are in 1 Kings chapter 18 tonight. And chapter 18, we've got the context. They're in the middle of a drought because Elijah called for a drought by the word of the Lord in chapter 17. He told Ahab that there will be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. And immediately after telling Ahab that I'm the only one who can summon rain, he immediately disappears so that Ahab cannot use him to summon rain. Well, this puts Israel in a bit of a pickle because now that there's no rain, there's nothing to grow food from. It also, because Baal was the god of the rain and the dew and the thunderstorms, and they just recently adopted him as kind of their primary deity, I imagine that it might make the nation look like they had egg on their face a little bit, since now they don't have any of the things that Baal is supposed to give them. Well, Elijah first went to the brook of Cherith and got fed by the ravens. They brought him bread and meat on a regular basis until the brook dried up. And then the Lord sent Elijah to Zarephath, to Sidon, where he was provided for by a widow. And God is using all sorts of unlikely sources of provision to help him out. And even though this widow is on her last meal, that last meal manages to stretch into infinity for as long as the drought goes on. Her flour and her oil are not exhausted during that time, but rather she is able to provide for herself, her son, and the prophet. And while Yahweh is providing, of course, He's also perplexing. The widow's son dies at the end of chapter 17, and the widow herself is rather distraught by this, because why is God providing for her through the prophet only to take away her son? Why did Elijah show up and bring her sin to remembrance and attention? But that's not what's really going on. It has nothing to do with her sin. Elijah takes the child and he prays to the Lord, and the Lord brings the child back to life. While Baal is supposedly being imprisoned in the realm of the dead, Yahweh is quite active and alive and raising the dead for Himself. Well, all this is going on, and it's about 3 years now they've been in drought and famine. That brings us to the scene at chapter 18. In chapter 18, beginning in verses 1 and 2, it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, "Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth." So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. God is about to send rain on the earth. And that is the frame for the whole of chapter 18. Chapter 18 is a big chapter. Probably one of the longest in the book. It's beaten out by chapter 8, I know that. But what's going on here is, it starts off, God says, I'm going to send rain on the earth. But we have to get to the very end of the chapter before God actually sends the rain. In verses 45 and 46, a little while the sky grew black with clouds and wind. There was a heavy shower, and Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And so now we got to ask ourselves the question, though, what goes on between that long stretch of space where God says, I'm going to send rain, and that actual end of the chapter in verse 45 where He actually sends the rain that He said He was going to send? What goes on in the middle of that? Quite a bit. Okay? Yeah? Let's talk about it. Why does all this stuff have to happen in the middle of chapter 18? You know, we've got a confrontation with Ahab. We have a contest with the prophets of Baal where they call on their gods to summon fire. And of course, they go all day and Baal doesn't answer. Then Elijah prays and Yahweh answers with fire, and the prophets of Baal are killed. And then Elijah has to pray some more before the Lord sends rain. So why does all this stuff have to happen before God will send rain? To let them know who God is. What if we had just skipped from verse 2 to verse 45 and it had just rained? What conclusion might have been drawn? Baal did it, right? You know, they would see the rain fall and well, Baal has finally gotten over whatever was bothering him. He's sending rain and we can all be happy again. That's not satisfactory position. That would mean that the drought really didn't accomplish much. Yahweh has a point to prove. And the point He's going to prove is that He is the true God. He is the only God. He's the only God that has any real power. And what's going to happen is that Baal has to be so utterly defeated and humiliated and embarrassed. His prophets have to be so eradicated that no one in Israel could make the mistake of thinking that Baal was somehow responsible for the drought and the rain. They have to draw the conclusion that the people draw later on in the chapter: Yahweh, He is God. So that's why we have to have the contest first. Now in verse 2 we learn the famine had severely affected Samaria, the capital city. In verses 3 through 6, Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water. Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we will find grass and keep the horses and mules alive and not have to kill some of the cattle." So they divided the land between them to survey it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. All right. Now, there's something kind of funny going on here. Do you notice the problem with Ahab and Jezebel's priorities here? Anybody see it? What's the motivation here? Keep the animals alive. We don't want to kill the cattle, right? We don't want to cut off the cattle, right? Now, by itself, is that a bad thing to not want? No, nothing wrong with that thinking. But why is it wrong here? I'm sorry? Why are the prophets in a cave? Because they want to kill the prophets. In fact, it's the same verb that's used when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord in verse 4. Obadiah hid these prophets. And in the very next verse, Ahab says, we got to go find some water so we don't have to cut off the cattle. You see something wrong here? Something wrong with the priorities of Ahab? We don't want to kill the cattle. We don't have any problem killing prophets of the Lord, but we don't want to kill the animals. That would be terrible. That would be an atrocity. Imagine that, a society that puts the life of an animal above the life of a human being. That never happens anymore, does it? Now there's something else going on here too. Of course, there's this other character involved in the story named Obadiah. What do we know about him? He was a man of God. He was a servant of the Lord. Of course, he's also something else too, if you notice. What else does he do? He has a second job. Well, yeah, he was taking care of the prophets, which was a manifestation of his devotion to the Lord. Jen. His steward. It says he was over the household, actually. Over the household, the al-habayith, was a technical term for the king's major domo, basically. And if you don't know what the word major domo is, go watch The Lion King. Because they use that word in that movie. It's the character Zazu plays that. But basically he was the guy who was the king's right-hand man. Think like Joseph was to Pharaoh. That's what Obadiah is to Ahab. He is over the household. So he's not just a lowly servant. He has a pretty prominent position in Israel. Now, there's also a theory that this is the same Obadiah that wrote the little book of Obadiah and the Minor Prophets. And that suggestion is as old as the Jewish Talmud. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's right. There's like 12 people in the Bible named Obadiah. It's like trying to claim that, two guys named Joe are the same guy. Well, there's so many of them, it's kind of would be coincidence more than anything. I suppose it's possible, but the problem is that the book of Obadiah isn't really reminiscent of anything that goes on in the time that this guy was alive. It's more reminiscent of the Babylonian captivity. In any case, though, Obadiah here is a secret helper of God. He's over the royal household, and he's using his position to help out the prophets of the Lord. How do we characterize Obadiah? What do we think of him as a person? Yeah, what he did was a good thing, certainly. This is actually the first time we find out that Jezebel's been exterminating prophets of the Lord. But But Obadiah has saved 100 of them. He's been providing them with food and water. Just like... It's a good question. We don't know. Well, let me ask you something. What happens if he gets caught doing this? Probably. Something bad's going to happen to this guy. He might get stoned. So what he's doing is clearly done at great personal risk. It's interesting, actually, the term he uses here, how he provides for the prophets in cave, is the same term used in chapter 17 of God providing for Elijah at the brook Cherith. So God provided for Elijah through ravens and a widow. God provides for some other prophets through his servant Obadiah. The name Obadiah, by the way, means servant of Yahweh. So he's rather aptly named. And what we've got here, though, Elijah's the outcast. Elijah serves God as an outcast. Obadiah serves God as an infiltrator. Elijah is much more out in the open, in your face. Obadiah is more quietly subversive. But is one man necessarily better than the other in terms of the way he serves the Lord? Well, no. They both have a role to play in God's plan. And that's the important thing we need to realize. His method of service is no less legitimate than Elijah's is. Now, let's see what else. They split up to look for grass in verse 6. And as they're looking for grass, Elijah appears. Let's pick up in verse 7. As Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him. And he recognized him and fell on his face and said, "Is this you, Elijah, my master?" He said to him, "It is I. Go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here." He said, "What sin have I committed that you're giving your servant into the hand of Ahab to put me to death? As the Lord your God lives, there's no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent to search for you, and when they said he is not here, he made the kingdom or nation swear that they could not find you. And now you are saying, go, say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. It will come about when I leave you, that the Spirit of the Lord will carry you where I do not know. So when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me. Although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told to my master what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, that I hid 100 prophets of the Lord by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water? And now you are saying, go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. He will then kill me. Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. All right. Now this whole exchange here, what is Obadiah so scared of? Huh? He's going to die. Why does he think he's going to die for this, though? He found Elijah. He found the guy that Ahab had been looking for. But that's not exactly what Obadiah is scared of. He's not scared that he's found Elijah. What is it? Yeah, he's scared that Elijah's going to be gone when he gets back. And, this is, what he's afraid of is interesting here. Because Ahab's desperation seems to have eroded his sense of humor a little bit. It's like how at the airport, you can't joke about bringing a bomb through security because they'll really mess you up for that. You're not getting on the plane. Well, Ahab's kind of like the TSA. He doesn't tolerate any Elijah jokes. Nobody's allowed to make jokes about that unless they're serious here. And if Elijah turns out to be a no-show, Obadiah will get in trouble. And so it's interesting. He's less afraid of Ahab. He's more afraid of the unpredictability of God's Spirit. It doesn't help that Obadiah is already running his own private rebellion on the side, and Ahab's probably heard rumors about that. Just look for an excuse to put him out. Surely he will kill Obadiah if he suspects him of hiding Elijah. Jen, did you have something? There's something else too that's just kind of, again, a passing comment in the text. Verse 10, what does verse 10 suggest about the kind of king that Ahab was? Okay, he searched everywhere for Elijah. But it's not just that he's a searcher. Look at the stuff he does. What kind of a king does that? Kind of aggressive. What does he do? He makes them swear. He goes to other kingdoms and makes the kings of those nations swear he's not here. How do you do that? What kind of a man has that ability? Apparently he did. Ahab, there's an implicit comment here that Ahab was actually a very powerful king and quite feared in the ancient world. If he can go around and make demands of other kings like that, that's a testament to the kind of power that he had as a king. It's implicit in the text. But it's not explicit, because there's also a problem. Not only is it an implicit testament to Ahab's power, it's also a testament to his failure. Why? He didn't find him. Kind of reminds us of another biblical character who's always searching and can never find anybody. Saul, yeah, I know. That's one of the humorous things about the 1 Samuel narrative is how everybody in the book of 1 Samuel is able to find David. You know, Jonathan's able to find him. The Philistines are able to find him. All these people are able to find him. But Saul can't do it. I mean, David's like sleeping in the cave right on top of him. And he walks into his camp at one point, and Saul can't find David. He accidentally stumbles into the cave and where David is hiding at one point. Saul can't find David. Ahab's a lot like Saul. He can't find Elijah. And he has been desperately searching. The worst part of it is, where's Elijah been most of the time? He was what? Right under his nose, he'd been hiding out in Zarephath near Sidon, which was the hometown of Jezebel. So here, Ahab's been living right next door to, Elijah's been living right next door to Ahab's in-laws. And, there you go. That's why he couldn't find him. Didn't want to visit the in-laws. That settles the whole thing. But no, what's really going on here is in testament to Ahab's failure and to God's power. If God doesn't want someone to be found, they ain't going to be found. Ahab can't even find grass for his cattle. All right, well, what happens now? Obadiah makes the arrangements and gets Ahab and Elijah together. In verse 17, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is this you, you troubler of Israel?" He said, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and you have followed the Baals. Now then, send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table." There's quite a little interesting wordplay going on here. Ahab calls Elijah the troubler of Israel. And Elijah says, "You got it wrong. You're the troubler of Israel." That word for troubler, though, akar, is a term that you might be familiar with if you read Joshua. Because in Joshua chapter 7, there's a man named Achan who steals from the plunder of Jericho. And, well, after Israel's lost in a battle, he gets caught. And what Joshua says to him when he gets caught basically, is that you are a troubler of Israel. You have troubled Israel this day, now we will trouble you. And what happens, Achan is called an Achor, a troubler. They kill him and by stoning him to death, and then they burn him, and then they stone him again just to make sure he's really dead. And they call that place the Valley of Achor, which means the Valley of Trouble. So Achan is quite the troubler of Israel. Well, it's that same term that's used here in 1 Kings chapter 18. Ahab calls Elijah a troubler of Israel, as if the drought were somehow Elijah's fault. Well, he did say it wouldn't end except by his word, so I guess we're going to blame Elijah on this. But Elijah turns the charge on his head. Elijah is not Achan in this story. Ahab and his family are the real Achans in this story. They are the real troublers. He and his father's household. And what makes them a troubler of Israel? They killed the prophets. They forsook the commandments of the Lord. They've been worshiping Baal. And just as all Israel in Joshua 7 had to be called together to deal with the one troubler of Achan, all Israel must now be called together again at Mount Carmel to deal with a new kind of trouble. There's something else going on here too, though. You got prophets eating at the queen's table. What's wrong with that? Huh? Prophets of Baal, prophets of the Asherah, they're all eating at the table. Where's that food coming from? The cattle they kept alive, right? That's impressive if they're eating live cattle. Let me ask you something, do you think everybody else in the nation's eating as well as these prophets right now? No! What's going on here? We're in the middle of a famine. We're in the middle of a famine where people are starving to death, and the prophets of the Lord are having to hide in caves for their lives, and we don't want to kill off the cattle. But man, oh man, it is a priority to feed the prophets of the Asherah and the prophets of Baal. That's the priority of this nation. Just so we make sure, again, we get our priorities straight. It's a lot of people. You're right, that is a lot of people to feed. The fact that the prophets eat at Jezebel's table is puzzling, because even in the time of the famine, it's okay to feed these guys. We talked last time about how, the famine surely would have caused a lot of people to suffer. But not if you're in the Baal club. Not if you've got exclusive access to the Jezebel table. Oh no. The nation suffers for their sins, but the sinners enjoy the luxurious royal bounty. They're going to get their comeuppance in this chapter. The Lord does not allow such inequity to stand. No, it is the Lord who ultimately has to intervene to right this wrong. So, now we get to the challenge, Mount Carmel. And what follows is a rather lengthy description of the contest. I'll start reading in verse 20. The Ahab sent a message among all the sons of Israel and brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him." The people did not answer him a word. And Elijah said to the people, "I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now let them give us 2 oxen, and let them choose 1 ox for themselves, and cut it up and place it on the wood, but put no fire under it. I will prepare the other ox and lay it on the wood, and I will not put a fire under it. Then you will call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God." And all the people said, "This is a good idea." The prophets are summoned together at Mount Carmel. Some people suggest that Mount Carmel was a sanctuary for Baal, but the evidence for that is a little conflicted, so we don't know for sure. If Carmel was the sanctuary for Baal, it gives these prophets a nice home team advantage, which makes it all the more humiliating when Elijah defeats them, when Yahweh defeats them. But the central question throughout this section of the text is this: who is the real God? Is it Baal, or is it the Lord? Is it Yahweh? Elijah asks a kind of a compelling question here. How long will you, literally, it says, how long will you limp between two opinions? It's a word that means to limp or to hobble. It's actually the same word that's used for passing over in Exodus 12, whenever the Lord passes over the houses with the blood on the door frames. So how long will they pass over between two opinions, or waver, or hesitate? But in this text, it's also interesting that that hobbling is the same thing that the prophets are doing in verse 26 when they hobble around the altar or leap over the altar. So that's kind of the idea here. Elijah accuses them of leaping between two opinions, and here's the prophets of Baal doing their leaping over the altar. It's one more picture of how the Bible likes to make word plays. And I guess here's the question here. When Elijah says this, how long will you be stuck between these two opinions of yours? Does this mean that Israel's devotion to Baal is just half-hearted? There's a lot of hesitation here How long will you hesitate between those two opinions? Nah. You know, you're right. It doesn't mean that they don't believe in Baal. Yeah. You know, for a long time, people depicted Baal, it was common for people to depict Baal worship as cruel and vicious and, you know, sacrificing children. And then there was this big movement, you know, I don't know how many years ago in the scholarly community, the ivory tower folks, that wanted to say that no, Baal worship was really much more tolerant. It was much more inclusive. We don't really care who you worship as long as you also include kind of Baal in the mix. And it was the friendly religion, as opposed to Yahwism, which was considered cruel and vicious and judgmental. Yes, Jen? Yes, Baal probably would have had a coexist bumper sticker. That's true. I hate that bumper sticker, by the way. I don't, you know, it's and not because of the word coexist, but because of what the implication they make that all faiths are to be held as equal in validity. But Baal is kind of the forerunner of postmodern thought, we might say. Now, there's a couple of clues in this text that the people are hostile to Yahweh, like the fact that the altar has been torn down, and the fact that they've been trying to kill prophets of the Lord. That doesn't sound good. Those aren't happy things to be going on about. So let's say something. Is there truth to the idea that Baal worship was the more, quote, tolerant of the two religions? Well, it did claim to be more syncretistic. But you know something? Omni Tolerance, is that a real thing? Is there such thing as Omni Tolerance, being tolerant of literally everything? No! Doesn't exist. It's fake. It's a myth. It is seldom tolerant of people. Well, tolerance is seldom tolerant of people who make monolithic claims that there's one truth, or that there's one God, or that there's one right way. And in this case, what we've got people who make a monolithic claim that no, their God is the true God, the only God. The first commandment, Yahweh's first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. That sound like tolerance to you, the religious tolerance of today? No, it doesn't. And would that have been tolerated by the tolerance movement of Baal? No, it wouldn't. The only thing they won't tolerate is intolerance. Interesting. And so in some ways Baal is kind of a god for our times, in addition to being a god for their times. Because, I mean, you know, while we don't have people that actually keep statues of Baal in their house and bow down to them and burn incense to them and worship them, we do have quite a few Baal worshippers today, I think. And Baal is a god that pretends to accept all other gods. You know, until you start stepping on our toes and telling you can't do that and you have to live this way and how we can and can't behave. So how dare Elijah? How dare he force this choice? How dare he make such demands? Well, guess what? God is that demanding. Yahweh is that demanding. And He has the right to be that demanding because He sort of made everything that exists. His mere existence has actual implicit demands on how people live. He's not someone to be taken lightly. He's not someone to be shrugged at. He's not someone to be, hobbled between two opinions. If you owe your existence to His existence, then you owe your service to His will. How long will you hesitate between two opinions? That's a question that I think all would do well to consider. Of course, people don't really answer. How can you answer that? There's no response to it. They are silent at his comment here. And of course, their silence is going to be echoed later by the silence of another non-character in the story, Baal himself. Elijah points out the fact, he's quite lonely. Of course, we're going to find out Elijah wasn't the only faithful worshiper of the Lord in existence, because you have Obadiah, and you have the 100 prophets that are hiding in the caves, and you have the 7,000 that are mentioned in chapter 19, who were a faithful remnant, who had not bowed the knee to Baal nor kissed him. But in this contest, there's only one prophet, and it's Elijah. How many prophets are needed to defeat the 450 prophets of Baal? Just, 0, actually. Well, we get Elijah here anyway, because he'll be the representative. Does the majority rule? Does societal consensus determine truth? What society says doesn't have any say on what truth is. And if it does, Elijah's in a lot of trouble in a minute. Elijah's proposal, each group will take an oxen, put it on the altar, call on their God, and their God will theoretically summon fire and burn the oxen. The real God will be the one who answers by fire. Now, this is relevant because Yahweh has a history of answering by fire. He did it in Leviticus 9 at the tabernacle. He did it in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, I think, whenever they set up the temple. He did it in 1 Chronicles 21 when David set up the altar at the floor of Araunah the Jebusite. And Baal, well, Baal, like we said before, was the god of the dew, the rain, and the storms, which includes the ability to throw lightning at stuff. In Greek mythology, they had kind of translated this incarnation of Baal to be Zeus, those lightning bolts from heaven. So, I guess it's a contest that would have appealed to these people. You know, calling for fire from Baal is a good idea. Well, let's see how it plays out. 3 years of drought were not enough to discredit Baal. Let's pick up in verse 25. Elijah lets them go first. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one ox for yourselves. Prepare it first for you are many. Call on the name of your God, but put no fire under it. And then they took the ox which was given them. They prepared it. They called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, answer us!" But there was no voice and no one answered. And they leaped about the altar which they had made. Well, it came about at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, "Call out with a loud voice, for he's a god. Either he's occupied, or gone aside, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and needs to be awakened." So they cried out with a loud voice and cut themselves according to their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out of them. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. Now, what do the prophets of Baal do here? Try to summon fire from their God. They pulled out all the stops, didn't they? Why doesn't it work? He's not a God. Would this have even worked on the true God? Huh? Yeah. I mean, here's... What? You may not always get what you want. Elijah lets them go first. He gives them the courtesy, and they can't light it themselves. Got to call on their God to light it. There's no voice, there's no answering. The way Elijah mocks them, I love it. I love anytime there's sarcasm in the Bible because it's one of those self-validation texts. But Elijah here, call louder. He's a god. Maybe he's just too busy for you, and you just need to get his attention. The expression, there is an expression here. The New American Standard says he has gone aside. It's actually a crude idiom for relieving yourself. The ESV has it as relieving yourself. The Net Bible is a little more innocuous. Maybe he just stepped out for a moment. But it's designed to be making a mockery of Baal by depicting him as, oh, he's in the outhouse. You got to shout louder so we can hear you. Well, of course, that's not what's going out. And this would have been offensive to the Baal prophets because, well, they would have believed Baal's drought to be a symptom of his imprisonment in the underworld. Oh, he's on a journey. Or maybe he's sleeping. You see how ridiculous that is. Does the true God sleep? We sleep as humans. Yahweh does not sleep. That's affirmed quite a bit in the Bible, actually. The true God does not sleep or get called out on errands or have to take bathroom breaks. And even if those things were true, of Baal, they would have rendered him impotent as a god. As one writer I saw put it, Baal has no beeper. You can't summon him. Well, of course, when it doesn't work, they get a little more desperate in the second half of the day and they start cutting themselves because apparently self-mutilation is a good way to get your God's attention. It was a common pagan practice. Leviticus 19:28 mentions it. Don't make any cut marks on yourselves for the dead. The prophets start raving in verse 29. Actually, that's the same verb used to mean prophesy elsewhere in the Bible. Sometimes it's used to act the madman, though, like when Saul raves in his house in 1 Samuel 18, or when he goes to visit Samuel. And you know something? For all of their whooping and leaping and cutting and raving and shaking and pleasing and yelling, they're unable to get Baal to answer and light the fire. Yeah, they went all day. This elaborate pagan rituals. You just got to get your God's attention. If we just move enough, if we just do enough stuff, we can get God to listen to us. There's no voice, there's no answering, there's no attention. The true God. Do we have to do an elaborate rain dance to get the true God's attention? No. For that matter, can we coerce God into doing what we want through this kind of elaborate ritual? No. Hyperkinetic frenzies is what this is. Do Christians ever fall into the trap of doing just that, though? And how? Yeah, there's some of that, certainly. I think even if you don't believe in modern day miracles, sometimes Christians trick themselves into thinking, well, if we just had more prayer meetings, more devotionals, more passionate worship, maybe dim the lights during the Lord's Supper or something, then, God will notice us, or somehow be more pleased with us, more interested in our appeals. Maybe if we worded our prayers better or worded them more precisely. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be more devoted to the Lord. But Yahweh is not manipulated by, all the stuff we can do to, hey, look at me. If we do this long enough, God will not pay more attention to us. As if we needed to do that. Religion is not about saying the magic incantations to get what you want. It's not about inputting the right codes into the vending machine to get God to do what you want. That's what we've got. Baal is like a vending machine religion, and they're rattling the machine and they're trying to get the thing to fall out, and it's not working. Of course, everybody's been in that frustrating situation where the bag of potato chips won't come off the hook. Because that's not the way it is with Yahweh. You look at the way Elijah responds to his God and the way Elijah interacts with his God, it's totally different than the way the prophets of Baal behave. All Elijah does, as we're going to see, all he does is pray. And that's enough. In verse 30, now we're going to see Elijah's version of the challenge. He said to all the people, "Come near to me." So all the people came near to him. He repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." So with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. He arranged the wood and cut the ox in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 pitchers with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." He said, "Do it a second time." And they did it the second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. And the water flowed around the altar and also filled the trench with water. Why is Elijah dumping so much water on this altar? It's not a fluke. It's not a trick. It's not an illusion. After all the stuff that the Baal prophets has done, try to incite Baal, he gives God kind of a handicap here. He covers the altar with water. Now there's kind of a symbolism here. 12 stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 pitchers of water for the 12 tribes of Israel. Which, this is interesting because technically Israel's only 10 tribes right now. But Elijah thinks it should be 12. The division of the kingdom is ultimately not intended to be a permanent thing. That's what's going on here. They douse the altar in water. They're pouring excessive water in the time of drought. Think about that as well. And, he wants to ensure about no accidental combustion. There will be no mistakes here. We're going to prove that Yahweh can do this even in spite of any disadvantage. And what's the point of all this? God is bigger than our human worldview. He's so much bigger. Oh, don't pour all water on that. God won't be able to light it if you pour water on that. You can hear the objectors. No, God can light that altar whether there's water on it or not. Doesn't matter if you built the whole thing out of flame retardant material. If God wants that thing to light on fire, it's going to light on fire. That's the kind of God He is. This story drives home how transcendent Yahweh really is. The problem with Baal religion, the problem with any false religion, is that their God is too small. I mean, if Carmel is a site of Baal worship, then this is proof that geography is no hindrance. Popularity is of no consequence. 450 against 1 doesn't matter. Yahweh still wins. Activity is no inducement. Ranting and raving versus quiet prayer. Now, you don't need to utter the magic words to get God to respond. Handicap is no hindrance. The altar is doused in water, no problem. I'm sending fire anyway. Because that's the kind of God that Elijah serves, and that's the kind of God that we serve as well. That's the lesson we need to learn. The question that God asked Abraham all those years ago in Genesis 18:14, is anything too difficult for the Lord? The answer is no, it's not. And if our conversations with people are starting out with, well, God can't really do this, or God would never do this, your God is too small. God can do anything He wants. He can do above and beyond anything we can ask or think, Ephesians chapter 3 puts it. Our role is not to place the limit on what God can do. Our role is simply as servants of His to humbly submit to His will, proclaim His word, to worship Him as the God He deserves. Whew. There you go. We're low on time. Do we light the altar on fire or not? Well, you know what? There's more that we can say. And I mean, we got the conflagration and the confession and the execution coming up. But I'm going to go ahead and put a stop here. And I will not be here Sunday. Mark will be filling in for me in the Bible class. So he will pick up with verse 36. And hopefully we will be able to finish out that chapter and maybe get into chapter 19 as well. Any comments or questions before we close? We'll leave ourselves on the cliffhanger. And thank you all for your attention and your comments.